The clown show continues. The clown show is no longer the takeover. It's the clown show led by lead clown Stephanie White and company. Stephanie White is not going to take any responsibility for this team not getting Caitlin Clark involved in the fourth quarter, her not getting a shot until 1 minute left in the fourth, Kelsey Mitchell pounding the hell out of the ball, shooting it nonstop. Stephanie White's full of excuses, and she's going to lie and pretend like, oh, we got to get Caitlin more involved. No, you don't. You don't even know how. You're about to take her off ball even more. This is a unmitigated disaster.
Something shifted after the Indiana Fever lost to the New York Liberty, something that most people completely missed. Stephanie White stood at that podium, and instead of pointing fingers at Kelsey Mitchell, the player most fans expected to take the heat, she redirected toward Caitlin Clark, the face of the franchise. The reason half the arena bought a ticket. Now, to be clear, this wasn't a public call-out, it wasn't a blow-up moment, and White didn't throw Clark under the bus in the way headlines love to make it sound. But what she did say was more interesting than that, because when a coach chooses her words carefully after a loss, every single word is a choice. And Stephanie White chose to talk about Clark's performance over Mitchell's. That decision tells you everything about where this team is and where Clark fits into the equation right now. You're probably already asking yourself, wait, what exactly did Stephanie White say? Because there's a big difference between a coach holding her star accountable and a coach quietly losing faith. And then the next question hits, why Mitchell got a pass here? Kelsey Mitchell has been on this team. She knows the system. She's the veteran presence. So why is the new face of women's basketball absorbing the post-game analysis? But then it gets deeper. Is this actually good coaching, the kind that pushes Clark to a higher standard? Because White genuinely believes she can handle it. Or is there something more uncomfortable happening, where the pressure and expectation around Clark has quietly started to fracture the locker room dynamic? And maybe the question you haven't let yourself ask yet, is Caitlin Clark actually performing at the level this Fever team needs her to right now? This video is going to break down exactly what Stephanie White said, word for word, and why the framing matters more than the content. You'll understand the specific play breakdowns from that Liberty game that likely triggered her comments, because the tape doesn't lie, and it tells a different story than the final score does. You'll also walk away with a clear picture of what Clark's role on this Fever team actually looks like right now, versus what fans projected it would be at this stage of the season. This isn't a hit piece and it isn't a defense. It's just the full picture, because you deserve that. But before we dive in, do you think Stephanie White is right to hold Caitlin Clark to a higher standard than her veteran players? Or is that the wrong move for a team still finding its identity? Let me know in the comments. It is frustration that has been building for weeks finally boiling over, and while the delivery is loud, the core argument underneath it is legitimate. This commentator is calling out something specific. Caitlin Clark didn't get a shot attempt until the final minute of the fourth quarter. 1 minute left in a competitive game. That's not a strategic decision, that's a failure of in-game management. Now, where this clip goes wrong is the tone. Calling Stephanie White a lead clown doesn't advance the argument. It actually makes it easier for people to dismiss the very real criticism buried inside it. But here's what you can't dismiss. Kelsey Mitchell was dominating ball usage down the stretch while Clark stood largely off ball, and White's post-game comments suggested Clark was the problem. That contradiction is what this video is really about, and it's messier than either side wants to admit.
The clown show continues. The clown show is no longer the takeover. It's the clown show led by lead clown Stephanie White and company. Stephanie White is not going to take any responsibility for this team not getting Caitlin Clark involved in the fourth quarter, her not getting a shot until 1 minute left in the fourth, Kelsey Mitchell pounding the hell out of the ball, shooting it nonstop. Stephanie White's full of excuses, and she's going to lie and pretend like, oh, we got to get Caitlin more involved. No, you don't. You don't even know how. You're about to take her off ball even more. This is a unmitigated disaster.
You probably watched that clip and immediately thought, okay, but is that actually true? Did Clark really not get a shot until the final minute? Because if that's accurate, that's a coaching decision worth examining seriously. Then the next layer hits you. Why is Mitchell getting unlimited green light while Clark, supposedly the centerpiece of this franchise, is operating off-ball in crunch time? And then something sharper crosses your mind. If White is publicly framing this as a Clark issue after the game, what does that say about how she actually views Clark's role on this team right now? Is Clark a franchise cornerstone, or is she being managed like a liability? And maybe the question that stings the most, if this is the offensive structure Stephanie White is building, what does that actually mean for Clark's development and this team's ceiling this season? Here's the straight answer. The shot distribution in that fourth quarter was a real problem, and the tape backs it up. Clark going virtually untouched offensively in a crucial stretch isn't a coincidence. It reflects a play-calling pattern that has shown up more than once this season. Mitchell is an experienced scorer, and White clearly trusts her in those moments, but trust and strategy aren't the same thing. You can trust a player and still be misusing your roster. What makes White's post-game comments particularly worth scrutinizing is the timing, deflecting toward Clark's involvement right after a loss, when Clark had almost no offensive opportunity to impact that game, is a contradiction that deserves a hard look. This isn't about picking sides between Clark and Mitchell. It's about whether the coaching decisions match the narrative being sold publicly. And the next piece of this story makes that contradiction even harder to ignore. Stephanie White walks into that post-game session and leans on missed layups and turnovers as her primary explanation for the loss. On the surface, that's not wrong. 11 missed layups is a real number. Turnovers are a real problem. But here's what the commentator correctly identifies. White is describing symptoms while completely avoiding the cause being her own rotational decisions. Pulling Clark off the floor immediately after she built a 12-point lead, watching that lead shrink to 5 almost instantly, and then framing the collapse around execution errors from players, that's a coach protecting herself with statistics. What's undeniable is this. You cannot bench the player who just gave you your largest lead of the game and then cite momentum killers without owning that substitution. That inconsistency is impossible to explain away.
Right into things, man. Stephanie White, the bonehead, has no idea where to turn, y'all. This lady's punch drunk out there. She's like punch drunk. She don't know what's going on. She don't know what to do. Check this out.
Steph, I see you circling stuff. I'm guessing the free throws are probably something in a circle. Just talk about the game and how that might have difference. You held them to 30% shooting and I think 11% from three, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, 23 free throw attempts in the fourth quarter. We had 2, and we did foul intentionally 3 times, so that's 6. You know, it was not a pretty game. You know, certainly. I felt like, you know, in spite of that, we gave ourselves opportunities. But it's really tough. I mean, we missed 11 layups. It's really tough when you're missing those kinds of shots to get back in transition defense. You know, it's momentum killers at times. Some of our turnovers, you know, we've just strung together a couple of...
No, I'll tell you what's a momentum killer. When Caitlin Clark goes and gets a 12-point lead and you sub her out and it drops to 5 in the snap of a finger. Your rotations are a momentum killer. Kelsey Mitchell missing wide open layups on a fast break, blowing a Caitlin Clark assist. That's a momentum killer. Kelsey Mitchell dribbling the ball 97.5 times before she shoots. That's a momentum killer. Kelsey Mitchell refusing to pass the goddamn ball. That's a momentum killer. Aaliyah Boston, $6 million, can't make a layup. That's a momentum killer. You not calling a single play all game for Caitlin Clark. That's a momentum killer. What we talking about?
You probably caught that detail about the 12-point lead immediately and thought, wait, Clark built that lead and then got subbed out. Because if that sequence actually happened the way it's being described, that's not a rotation, that's a contradiction. Then you start pulling the thread. Why is Mitchell getting unlimited possessions in crunch time when she's missing open layups off Clark assists and over-dribbling in transition? And then something bigger surfaces. If Aaliyah Boston is earning $6 million and can't convert at the rim in critical moments, why is Clark the name attached to the team's offensive struggles publicly? Then the question you can't shake. Is White rotating based on what the game is telling her, or based on a predetermined hierarchy that Clark hasn't broken into yet, regardless of what she produces? Because those are two very different coaching philosophies, and only one of them builds a contender. The honest answer is that White's rotation against the Liberty had the fingerprints of a coach who doesn't fully trust her most dynamic offensive weapon in high-leverage moments yet. That's not unusual for a second-year player, but it becomes a problem the moment the public narrative shifts blame onto that same player. Mitchell's ball dominance this season isn't new. Boston's rim conversion struggles aren't new either. These are patterns, not one-game anomalies, and White has had enough time to adjust around them. The fact that she hasn't, and that Clark is consistently the player absorbing reduced touches in fourth quarters, suggests the offensive structure isn't built around Clark's strengths. It's built around habits that existed before Clark arrived. That gap between the roster's potential and its actual usage is what makes this situation genuinely worth paying attention to. And the specific moment that crystallizes all of this is coming up next. Stephanie White's post-game explanation is that the Liberty's length made it hard to get C loose. That's a real defensive challenge. New York's length is legitimate, but the commentator's counter-argument cuts straight through it. If your solution to an elite-length defense is to move Clark further off the ball, you've misdiagnosed the problem entirely. Clark's greatest offensive weapon isn't catch and shoot, it's a pick-and-roll creation. Her ability to read a defense, manipulate ball screens, and either attack the paint or kick to open shooters is what makes her genuinely difficult to guard. Taking the ball out of her hands against a long defensive team doesn't neutralize their length, it does the job for them. That's the coaching reality White's word salad is dancing around, and you already feel it.
Stops and we turn it over in a timely manner, and look, their length causes challenges. I mean, we couldn't get C loose very much at all, and we got to do a better job of finding ways to do that.
We couldn't get C loose very much at all. We got to find a better way of doing that. How about setting some real damn picks, Stephanie White? See, you think we stupid. You getting up here giving us all this word salad, all this gibberish that means nothing. You have no idea what the hell you doing. You have no idea how to get Caitlin Clark free. You think getting her free is taking her off the ball even more. No, you need to put the ball in her hands more, allow her to play pick and roll, allow her to attack defenses and break them down with her passing. The scoring is gonna come. You keep taking her off the ball for damn Raven Johnson that won't stop shooting the ball all of a sudden.
You probably heard White say, "We couldn't get C loose," and immediately thought, okay, but whose job is it to solve that? Because a head coach citing a defensive problem without presenting a single adjustment isn't analysis, it's deflection. Then the sharper question follows. If Clark's value is in her pick-and-roll playmaking, why is the Fever consistently running sets that reduce her to an off-ball option? And then something that cuts even deeper, is White actively designing around Clark's strengths? Or is she retrofitting Clark into a system that was never built for her? Then the question you probably haven't fully formed yet. What does it mean for this franchise long-term if the coach and the player are fundamentally misaligned on how Clark should be used? Because that's not a one-game problem. That's a structural one. Here's the direct answer. White's offensive system has a Clark problem, and it's not Clark's fault. Pick-and-roll usage for Clark this season has been inconsistent at best and deliberately suppressed at worst. The data on this is clear. Clark's efficiency and assist numbers spike in possessions where she initiates off screens or operates as the ball handler in two-man actions. Reducing her to spot-up situations against a team built to contest perimeter shots is tactically indefensible. The Raven Johnson detail is also worth sitting with. A role player getting more on-ball creation than your franchise centerpiece in a competitive game isn't a rotation quirk. It's a priority signal. White's press conference answers aren't confusing because the situation is complicated. They're confusing because the strategy underneath them doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And what Stephanie White actually said about Clark after this game makes everything you just heard land completely differently. What happened after the Indiana Fever's loss to the Liberty wasn't just a post-game press conference, it was a window into a coaching philosophy that hasn't caught up to the player it's supposed to be building around. Stephanie White's words weren't a betrayal of Caitlin Clark, but the rotation decisions behind those words tell a story that no amount of careful language can fully cover. The contradiction between blaming Clark's involvement while simultaneously limiting it isn't a small tension. It's the central fault line this Fever season will be defined by. If White doesn't close that gap, the ceiling on this roster stays frustratingly low regardless of the talent on the floor. If this kind of film room breakdown is what you come to watch, subscribe, because this Fever season is far from over, and neither is this conversation.